Hello and a warm welcome to Tata Literature Live. The 11th annual Mumbai International Litfest is now completely digital. The event has been co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects. This session is brought to you by Kotak. There will be a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the session, so please do send in your questions in the comments section of the platform you are viewing from. Jack London, author of literary classic The Call of the Wild, once said, "Life is not always a matter of holding good cards, but sometimes playing a poor hand as well. In life, just like in poker, we need to keep making the best choices we can, no matter the cards we are dealt." Speaking on the topic today is psychologist, author, and professional poker player Maria Konnikova. She is the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Confidence Game and Mastermind, How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes. Her most recent book, The Biggest Bluff, talks about the balance of skill and chance in life. Her books are a slice of life, mainly dealing with odds and how to make life poker in some way. Maria will be in conversation with Mumbai-based independent writer, curator and recreational poker player Girish Shahane. A very warm welcome to our speakers.
Hi everyone, and hi Maria. Are you in New York right now?
I'm actually in Vermont, but you're right that I am a New Yorker and live in New York normally. I'm just away for a little bit.
All right. Gillian said that you have 2 bestsellers that you've published already, but I was following your Twitter feed, and I guess The Biggest Bluff is also on the bestseller list now, so we should correct that to 3, right?
That is correct. I mean, talk about luck. I think I'm incredibly fortunate. I've been very lucky that people have wanted to read the books. You can write a great book, but it still takes a lot of luck to get on the bestseller list.
That's right. So if we begin at the beginning, it begins with you having a run of bad luck, you can say, in various ways, which you may want to describe. And then you read von Neumann's, about von Neumann and his theories. And he's one of the most brilliant minds that very few people have ever heard of. The computer, game theory, the hydrogen bomb, all kinds of things we owe to him, or parts of them we owe to him. And that leads you to poker, is that right? Have I kind of described it correctly?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, as you briefly mentioned, I went through a period in my life where just everything seemed to be going wrong. My health, professional things, just everything all at once seemed to fall apart. And it made me realize how much of our lives depend on chance, that a lot of things that we take for granted, like that we're healthy, that we're employed, that everyone around us and everyone we love is healthy and employed, it's not just a testament to our skill. It's also the fact that we've been getting lucky and that things have been going our way. And when that stops, that's when you really wake up and say, oh, wow, it's not enough to be good. You also have to get lucky. And yeah. I decided I wanted to write about that. And as you mentioned, I started reading a lot of books because that's what I do whenever I write about anything new. And so I started reading John von Neumann, and I'd heard of him, but I'd never read anything he'd written. And what I learned was that von Neumann is a poker player, or was a poker player, and that game theory, which is one of the most foundational theories of economics of the 20th century, was based on poker. So von Neumann actually had one thing in common with me, only one, because I am nowhere near his level of intelligence or brilliance or mathematical knowledge, which is that he didn't like games. So I'm not someone who grew up playing games at all. I didn't have a deck of cards in my house, not a games playing household, mostly read. That's kind of what we did to pass the time. And neither did von Neumann. And he didn't like them for one very specific reason. He found them boring. He found games like chess boring because they were solvable. And with his mathematical brilliance, he said, you know what? This is a game of perfect information. I can see the entire board, and I can calculate the right move. There's an answer. And that's not life. In life, you don't have perfect information. On the other hand, he didn't like games like casino games like roulette, because that's at the other extreme. That's perfect chance. There's nothing that you can do. It's all up to the spin of the wheel. And also not like life. But he absolutely adored poker. And the reason was that poker, he felt, mirrored decision-making in real life, because it's a game of incomplete information, of knowns, of unknowns, of things that we have in common, of things that only I know, of things that only you know. And our goal is to try to figure out, how do I make the best decision possible, given that I don't know everything, and given that I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what cards are yet to come. And he has this beautiful quote that I quote in the book, which is what really kind of turned me on to the game. And he writes, real life consists of bluffing, of little tactics of deception, of trying to figure out, what does this man think I mean to do? And that's what games are about in my theory. And I read that as a psychologist, and I said to myself, how amazing that a mathematician, that someone whose entire life is numbers, acknowledges that decision-making isn't just about that it's also about the human elements. It's also about psychology, about emotion. And that's what originally turned me on to poker. I thought, well, if it's good enough for von Neumann, it's good enough for me. Let me start this. Let me actually learn a little bit about the game. And as I did that, just something clicked, and I thought, this is the book. I want to learn how to play poker. Why don't I immerse myself in this world, get someone really good to teach me, and see what happens, and use it as the metaphor for life?
I mean, there's an interesting story of von Neumann, actually. He was on the targeting committee for the atom bomb, and they had fixed on Kyoto, in fact, as the perfect destination for a bomb for various reasons. And then he was overruled by a person who had spent his honeymoon, happened to have spent his honeymoon in Kyoto, and found it so beautiful that he said that we cannot destroy this city, and therefore then Nagasaki was moved up. I mean, it's just, I mean, the chance factors in some of the most important things that have happened in history are just remarkable, and von Neumann is kind of connected to that. But you have a wonderful story in one of the best sections of the book, I thought, the Monte Carlo, which is so fabulously written as well. And you talk about him in Monte Carlo. Could you just lead us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, I didn't know that story about Kyoto. That's amazing. Like you said, talk about the role of chance. So thank you for sharing that. I write about von Neumann in Monte Carlo because I happened to travel to Monte Carlo for poker, and von Neumann actually also had a bit of a history in Monte Carlo. And there's this amazing story that I came across in the unpublished autobiography of his wife, Clary von Neumann. And it talks about this man, von Neumann, and he's sitting in a casino at a roulette table, and he has all of these numbers in front of him, all of these sheets of calculations. And she approaches him and asks him what in the world he's doing. She has no idea who he is. And he explains that his name is Johnny, and that he is looking at a system for beating roulette. And she's very skeptical, and so walks away, goes to the bar. She doesn't like gambling. And sometime later, this same Johnny comes up to her and says that, you know, he's back. And she asks if he'd like a drink, and he says that's a wonderful idea if she can pay, because it turns out his system still has a few kinks to iron out, because he's now broke. So he didn't quite beat roulette. And he didn't beat it, but this was the seed of what would become game theory and what would become kind of the calculations that form the foundation of this incredibly powerful way of looking at the world. And I absolutely loved it because it just sheds so much light on him. It humanizes him. It tells you a lot about what he was like. It also tells you a lot about his hubris, right? To think that he could actually beat roulette for a second. He's like, well, it's a game of chance, but I'm brilliant, so maybe I can beat this too. And I really loved finding that little piece of history and realizing that the Monte Carlo simulations and all of that actually came out of Monte Carlo.
Well, so you read von Neumann, and then you get interested in poker, and then you meet and are mentored by one of the legends of the game, Eric Seidel, who is unique because poker, like chess increasingly, is a young man's game. I mean, and I'm emphasizing both of those because one of them is particularly important in your case, being one of the few females, and that plays out in interesting ways that you describe. But also a young person's game, increasingly, for the stamina. And Eric Seidel is almost the only person who has managed for 30 years to stay at the very top of the game and still continues to do so. So how is it that a novice like yourself managed to convince him to mentor you, having never played a hand of poker in your life?
Yeah, I'll do you one more. I not only had never played a hand of poker, I didn't actually know how many cards were in a deck, and embarrassed myself the first time he and I ever met because I told him that I didn't really know anything about poker, but I knew that there were 54 cards in a deck, and he still does not let me, to this day, will not let me live it down, and keeps joking that when the jokers come out of the deck, I'm going to win. I'm going to win the world. For anyone listening who doesn't play poker, it's 52 cards in the deck, not 54. Your odds calculations are going to be wrong, so don't use 54. So originally, I didn't know anything, not only about the game, but I didn't know anything about the players. So I didn't know any of the big names. So anyone who's been around the poker world, there are some names that come up over and over, but I didn't know any of that. I'd never watched poker. I'd never been interested in it. So I just did some Google searches, to be honest, and tried to look to see, best poker player in the world and see what came up. And as you mentioned, Eric really stands out for his longevity. I mean, most players who are considered very good right now, they started playing maybe 10 years ago, some a little bit longer. But Eric has been around since the 80s, and when you look at his results, he's been playing at the highest levels and winning that entire time. So that was one of the things that made him stand out to me. He also seemed like a nice guy. When I watched videos of poker players, a lot of them did not seem particularly friendly. They were screaming, they were swearing, they were throwing tantrums. And Eric was just really calm and collected and just humble. And so I decided I'd want to approach him. And obviously, that's only half the equation, right? The second half is, how do I convince him that this is a good idea for him? So because my training is as a journalist, I've had a lot of practice cold calling and just randomly reaching out to very intimidating and brilliant people. And so I did that. And I said, I'm a writer for The New Yorker, because at the time I was still full-time at The New Yorker. I'm working on a new project, and I'd love to talk to you about it. And talk about luck, it turns out that he's one of the only poker players that has a subscription to The New Yorker, reads The New Yorker, actually knew who I was, and likes my writing. So he said, sure, let's meet, let's talk. So we did. And I have not prepared for a meeting as much as I prepared for that one, basically ever. I don't remember the last time I did something like that, maybe a really important job interview, because I knew that I'd need to convince him that it was worth his time, because I was going to be asking a lot of him. I was going to be asking him to mentor me for a year, to let me be a part of his life, tag after him, introduce me to this world. And so I really did my homework. I really did a lot of research, and I also tried to figure out what can I bring to this relationship? And so what I had wasn't poker, but it was psychology. And so I actually came prepared with psychology studies that I'd found of poker that had never really made it into popular literature. And so I printed them out for him so that he'd have some stuff that I could give him, on poker tells and on this and on decision making to try to prove that I could bring something to the relationship too. And I think what convinced him was a few different things. So first of all, I think he saw an opportunity to bring the love of poker outside of the poker community, because I'm not your typical poker player in the sense that I wasn't like a novice coming up to him and say, teach me how to play poker. I was a journalist, I was a psychologist coming up to him and say, I know nothing and I want to write about it. And he thought, wow, this is a broad audience. So I think he was thinking ahead. He loves the game, and every opportunity to spread that love to a different community, I think, was a strong motivator to him. But I think there was also something else. So you mentioned that it's a young man's game, and also increasingly it's a mathematician's game. It's a game of numbers. It's a game of statistics. It's a game of people with a very, very heavy mathematical background. So, for instance, I've played with people who have PhDs from MIT and Caltech. I mean, people who really, really, really study this. And increasingly, people have thought that the psychological approach, the more human approach, is on its way out. That people like Eric, who still are considered a little bit more old school, that they're dinosaurs, so to speak. And that's obviously not true, because Eric is still beating all of them. But I think he saw in me a chance to prove a concept, right? A chance to see, is psychology enough? Can someone be taught to think well and to leverage that background in psychology in order to play well, and can that person still succeed? And if the answer is yes, that would be a huge win for him, a huge kind of proof of concept for his philosophy. And so he agreed to try it out. He said, okay, this might be interesting. Let's see how it goes. And if we don't like it, we can always step back. And it turned out that we got along really well. And so it did work out. But and I'm so glad that it did, because the book would have been very different. My journey would have been very different. Everything would have been different had I worked with someone else, because I think Eric is a unique individual in many respects. And he taught me much more than a typical poker player, I think, ever could.
Yes. And the fact is, I don't know how much of a giveaway this is, but it's on Hendon Mob. It's like public knowledge that you did, within a year or so, a little over a year, win a really major tournament. And that actually winning makes such a massive difference from the point of view of a book. But so much luck plays into it, because very, very good players go years without winning a big tournament.
That's absolutely right. I mean, to win a tournament, you have to play well, but you also have to get lucky. And I know how much that win meant, because people don't care about second place. I mean, the runner-up is quickly forgotten, and so it was a very different thing for me to actually have that win. All of a sudden, I had attention. I became sponsored by Poker Stars. All of these things happened that wouldn't have happened had I come in second place. And as I write about in the book, I mean, that did not have to happen. I played well, but I also made some mistakes. And I also got lucky in a few very important spots. And I think that it's so important to not forget the luck and not forget the fact that you can play your best game and still not. A win is not indicative of some innate superiority. All it means is that, yes, you did well, and you thought well, and you played well, and then you also lucked out. And it did not have to happen. So it's not a secret, and it's also not the end of the book. So that was a narrative choice that I made to keep playing after that and to keep writing after that, because I didn't feel like my journey was over. I thought it would be cheating to end it with this tournament win, because what happens next, right? Am I a one-hit wonder? Am I someone who just got really lucky and then that's it? Or was this really a testament to some amount of skill that I'd gained? And to me, that was a really important question.
Yes. And I will come back to the end of it later, but I don't know if our feed is still going or it's frozen, but can you hear me, Maria?
I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes. So we can continue our conversation. Hopefully it's still on Facebook.
Great.
So although you are a psychologist, and that was supposed to be part of what you were bringing to this game, you did at one point feel the need for a mental coach. Can you tell us about that? What was it in your training as a psychologist that had not prepared you for poker?
That's such an excellent question. So I was approached by a man named Jared Tendler very early on in my poker journey. He'd heard that I was doing this, and he sent me an email and said, hey, my name is Jared Tendler. I'm a mental game coach. I work with a lot of athletes. I work with a lot of poker players. And if you ever need me, I'm here. And I just kind of totally dismissed him. I said, yeah, okay, your background looks great, your credentials look great, but I don't need a mental coach. I have a PhD in psychology. I'm all set. Why would I need a mental coach? And, fast forward to 6 months later, and here I am thinking, uh-oh, maybe I need a mental coach after all. And I think the reason why it's so important and why I've come to believe so strongly in the need for mental coaching for anyone is that it's really, really difficult to see yourself and analyze yourself objectively. And it's much easier if you have someone who's trained, who can look at you, who can look at your decision process from the exterior and analyze it for you and actually show you things that you couldn't see yourself. And poker, and I think anything in life, it's not just about the strategy. It's also about being able to execute the strategy at the right place, at the right time, in the right way. It's about being able to control your emotions. It's about being able to control yourself and to know yourself. And I found myself over and over, I'd studied hard, I had really great coaches, I had really great people working with me, and I found myself over and over in situations where I theoretically knew what to do, but there was something in me that was stopping me from executing it, that was stopping me from doing what I knew I should be doing. And it was the most bizarre feeling. I could see myself almost from the outside. I could, see myself sitting there and not acting, not doing what I knew I should be doing. And I'd get so mad at myself. And then sometimes I'd just say, I'm going to do it anyway. And I would do it, and it wouldn't work because my heart wasn't in it. And I was nervous, and people can sense that. And it made me realize that there's a huge gap between theory and practice. And even though my theoretical knowledge was very strong, I'd studied this for many, many years. I'd run studies on decision making. This was my area of expertise. That doesn't mean that in a new high-pressure situation where there are so many things that are new to me, it doesn't mean that I'll actually be able to execute it. And what Jared did was help me figure out what was holding me back and how to work on it so that I could, in the moment, execute, so that I could find strategies to help me so that I could prepare for those moments that inevitably happen when you're playing poker, where it all gets to be too much. What do you do? How do you make yourself keep thinking well? How do you cool your emotions? How do you calm down? How do you move on after bad beats? How do you just take deep breaths and focus? And that's much easier said than done, because especially if you're playing tournaments, those take a lot out of you. Those days are long. You're playing for 12, 13, 14 hours a day. You're tired. You're emotional. There's so many swings. And those are the moments that really break you down mentally. Even the strongest players, I think, need help with the mental game.
And I was very sympathetic in a way reading all those passages, because I'm not a naturally good poker player. I discovered I knew theory better than many people who played much better than I did for the same reasons, and some of the same reasons. Playing a bit too passively. I know I have to 3-bet here, but I choose just to call, though I know what I'm supposed to be doing. End up near the bubble of tournament, short stacked, and then just go for the min cash. So I've very much been there. But once you grew more comfortable in these situations, not only did you get much better at poker, but you also, in a sense, got much better at life, which was interesting. Your negotiating skills in life changed. So could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something where I saw a complete cycle where things that I knew from outside of poker helped me in poker, but then things I was learning at the poker table ended up really helping me in my professional life, in my personal life. And yes, it helped me in one of the things I hate most of all in the world, which is negotiating. Really great at negotiating on behalf of other people. You know, I can promote my friends, I can help them, but I'm really horrible and I really hate negotiating on behalf of myself. And I had this one experience where I was asked by an editor at a magazine to write a story. And it was a story I was really interested in and something that I'd done a lot of work on, so it wasn't going to be that much research for me. And I almost just accepted on the spot because that's what past me would have done. I mean, I'm a writer. I accept assignments. And then I just took a step back and said, wait, why don't I actually employ some of my poker strategy here and figure out, who has the strong hand and who has the weaker hand and who has the where's the power dynamic here? And it's not a question that I would have ever considered asking before, but this time I thought, let me try something new. And so I wrote her back and said, you know what, I'm very busy right now. I'm working on a new book, so I'm not really accepting freelance assignments. And then that was kind of my checking over to the editor and not showing my hand. And then the editor wrote back and said, well, what if we pay you more than we've offered to pay you in the past? And just to be clear, the initial rate was not a very good one that they had offered. And I said, well, again, past me would have definitely accepted. And current me said, I really have to be paid more than I'm paid at my home magazine for it to be worth my time right now, because right now my time is just very valuable. I'm spending it on so many different things. So I basically just, called and kept the conversation open, and finally got a much better rate than I'd ever gotten, not just from this magazine, but from almost any magazine. And I accepted. And I never would have had the guts to do that before. I never would have had the fortitude mentally to risk losing the assignment, to risk the editor walking away. And this time I played out the hand. I realized that I was actually strong and that there was probably a bluff on the other side when they said that they couldn't pay me anymore. And I was able to suss that out and to actually make it work. And that was a very, very proud moment for me. I'd like to say that from that point on, I always was a master negotiator. That would be a lie. I still don't like negotiating. It's still difficult for me. but I'm improving, and that's the important thing. And the improvement is coming from poker.
Yes. And at this point, again, for all those who are watching, we do want your questions. Do send in your questions to Maria, and we will have 15 minutes near the end of the session where we can put those to her. And meanwhile, I'd like to move to the second part of that equation of the young man's game. And we've just had a Netflix series, an excellent series called the Queens Gambit. I don't know if you've seen it. It's about this young chess prodigy who's a woman in a girl in a man's world. And on the one hand, there are people who are tremendously sexist in their responses to her. But on the other hand, once they realize what she is and what she's got, they're also tremendously appreciative and helpful. And I see in your story as well both sides of that equation, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There are definitely a lot of parallels. And for people who don't know, I mean, the professional poker world is 98% male. I mean, just think about that for a second, what it means to be 98% male. I mean, I could go for days and weeks without playing with another woman. And whenever a poker tournament gets, 4% female attendance, they say, yes, we got so many women here. And I say, oh, my God, this is a disaster. When you think 4% is good, it means you've been living in this bubble for quite some time. And that at the beginning was very, very difficult for me because I'd always considered myself a strong woman, someone who was kind of a powerful representative of my gender. And all of a sudden, I was placed in this new environment where I was a novice, where I didn't know anything, and where there was, as you say, a lot of sexism, a lot of bullying. I had to deal with a lot of nasty stuff, especially in the early days at the lower levels at the poker table. And it made me really sad to realize that I let it get to me, that kind of in those early days, I would let men bully me. I would avoid conflict. I'd say, you know what, you just take the chips, you take the pot. I don't need it. It's not the way to play poker, right? That does not make you a winner. And I was losing a lot of money. And it forced me to reckon with that and to realize how much I'd internalized a lot of gender stereotypes from society, the way that society views women and what are acceptable behaviors and what aren't, that I was trying too much to be nice. I didn't want people to think that, I was aggressive or things that are seen negatively in women. Once I realized that, and once I also realized how much people were relying on stereotypes when they played against me, once I realized that they didn't actually see me as a poker player, they saw me as a woman. And so what I needed, my equation changed. My strategy then became to figure out, okay, how do you see women? How do you think women play poker? Because not many women play poker. Most of these men had some model in their mind. My girlfriend plays poker and she never bluffs. Or, my aunt plays poker and she always bluffs, or whatever it is. If I can figure out how you think women play poker, then I can turn it on its head. Then I can use it against you. And so when I realized that being underestimated wasn't a bad thing, that it could actually be a superpower, that's when I started winning. Because I realized that if people underestimated what I was capable of, then I could get away with so much. I could do things that were more aggressive. I could do things that I would never have considered doing before because they didn't think I was capable of it. They didn't expect it from me. And that was such a powerful realization and changed a lot of the way I played and a lot of the way I thought. But as you say, there was a shift. So at some point, after I'd had some success, after I became a more known player, all of a sudden people knew who I was. And then I had to readjust my strategy yet again. There was a funny moment in my poker playing career that's not in the book when I was, this was after I'd after the PCA tournament that I won, and after I'd already been on multiple television tables where people can actually see how you play, I was in Canada and I was playing at a table with this incredibly good tournament player who I knew, and he was just owning my soul. He was crushing me. He was just completely outplaying me at every turn. And of course, he's a much better player, but at that point, I was playing well. I'd progressed enough that it shouldn't have been that big a difference. And then I realized that the televised tables that I'd played at the PCA had just aired, and he'd watched them. And I just asked him. I said, "Hey, so did you like that PCA?" That PCA television stream?" And he looked at me and he said, "Yep, it was very interesting." And I just started laughing because I realized that I had to change my strategy again, because he'd seen how I would exploit people's perceptions of me. He knew what I was doing, and he just completely outplayed me. And so it just goes to show that you can never stay still. You have to constantly figure out how people see you. And you have to realize that, yeah, most people see me as a girl, but smart players, good players, see me as a poker player and study the way I play and know how to exploit that. And it was a very valuable lesson. So he ended up knocking me out of this tournament. And as I got up, and I said, "Yep, thanks for knocking me out." And he looked at me and he said, "Maria, you knocked yourself out." And he was absolutely right. And I've tried to never knock myself out ever since then.
Yeah. But there are also people who are generous with their time, and legends. Dan Harrington, whose books I also started with. I'm so interested that Eric Seidel, it just proves what an old school mind he is, that he should recommend Harrington's books still. And also Phil Galfond, who comes across as a wonderful person in all the television feeds I've seen. But you experience it, that he actually is a remarkable person in real life.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly humbling to be introduced to some of the best, smartest minds that I've ever met, and to also realize that there are so many good people in poker, especially at the top of the game. These players aren't just brilliant, they're also good human beings. And I think they were willing to be generous because they understood they all love poker. Their motives are all very pure. So people like Phil Galfond, like Ike Haxton, yeah, of course, they want to make money. It's a profession for them, but they also love the game. They're not playing it to win the maximum amount. They're playing it to think well. They're playing it because it motivates them, because it excites them, because it teaches them things. And so I think because of what I was doing, they were very happy to share their time, and also because, quite honestly, I came with Eric's recommendation. And Eric's name opens a lot of doors because everyone loves Eric, because Eric is just such a good guy and just such a mensch and wonderful human being. But I have to say, I mean, I have a PhD. I've worked with incredibly brilliant people, and some of the most brilliant minds I've met who could do anything they wanted are poker players. And they choose to play poker, not because they're washed out and can't do anything else, but because they see something special in this game. But you know what? If they wanted to be professors in any department in the world, they could do that. If they wanted to be CEOs, they could do that. But they just happen to love poker. And to me, it was very inspiring. And it made me really fall in love with the game, to see what was possible and to see the kinds of people who were drawn to it. So that's something that I think everyone can aspire to.
Yes. And I completely share that, and I'm very envious of you to have had that experience. But there is the other side of it, which we must perhaps also talk about, which is the dark side of poker, which is you speak of it in comparison with stock markets and how chance is equally at play there. But perhaps a difference which maybe you don't explore, is that investing in stocks is not a zero-sum game, whereas poker more or less is. The house takes a cut usually, and then there's an economy built around it. But by and large, somebody is losing money, and you are making money, or you're losing money to someone else. So it is different at that level, right?
Well, I actually think that poker is more positive sum than people give it credit for. So yeah, obviously any given hand is zero sum. If I win the hand, you're not winning it, right? So it goes to me or to you. But I think in general, the poker ecosystem, in order to be healthy, has to be positive sum. So let me give you just an example. If you're a cash game player, right? Or I'm a tournament player, but I do play cash games sometimes. Sometimes I will lose on purpose because it gives me information. First of all, I want to see what cards someone has, and I think that giving away this money, giving away this pot is actually worth it for me so that I have some insight. But also because if it's a cash game, I want to be invited back. If I think it's a good game, I want people to like me. I want it to be an experience where they enjoy having me at the table. So it's not like I will lose a lot of money on purpose, but sometimes I will, let them win a hand when I could win that hand. It's not all about winning every single pot all the time. It's about making sure that players want to play. And I also think that you have to realize that a lot of people play for different reasons. It's not just about the money. People get satisfaction from different elements of the poker game. Some people play because they like the company and they like the atmosphere. And for them, that's part of the experience. And so if they have that, even if I take all their money, they still had a great time because they had fun and they enjoyed it. And so I always strive to be an ambassador for the game who's pleasant to play with and who does not wear, headphones and glasses and, I'm just here to play. No, I'm actually here to play, but also to make sure that people are enjoying themselves, having a good time. And for some people, they say, I had a great time, I want to do it again. I will play again tomorrow, even though I lost. And so I think that you have to realize that there are different pieces of the pie. It's not just the money economy. And finally, there is an element of luck, just like there is in stock markets. You can be an awful trader and have a great year, and you can be a pretty bad poker player and win. And that you have to realize that in the short term, luck can actually be very powerful. And so yes, there are winners and losers. Over the long term, better players are going to win and worse players are going to lose. But it's a game and people play for different reasons. And if you're also, if you're losing money, but you're actually taking it seriously and learning how to think clearly, how to make better decisions, how to analyze your thought process, how to think probabilistically, how to take all of these lessons that poker has to offer, I think that you can become a winner in other areas of your life, even if you're not winning at the poker table.
Yes. Well, that's an excellent defense, I must say, that as a poker ambassador, poker stars and everybody are lucky to have you. 45 minutes in, Maria, we are going to take just a 2-second break for the sponsor to be allowed to show themselves, reveal themselves, and then we will take audience questions, and I have a couple more as well, in case the audience doesn't have as many. So just a 2-second break, and then we'll come back with audience questions. And we're back with Maria Konnikova, psychologist, best-selling author, and a poker professional. And the first question comes from Shefali Balsari Shah. And I don't know how much you'll be able to answer both sides of this question, but certainly one, I think, should. Culturally, how do most Americans view the role of luck and chance as compared to Indians who are culturally conditioned to be fatalistic?
So I think that it's hard to say in aggregate, but I do think that America was built on this concept of the American dream, right? That if you just work hard enough, anyone can be anything. And so I do think that historically, America is a country that has way overvalued the role of skill and underestimated the role of luck, because they say, oh, well, if you just work hard, you can succeed. See, look at you, Maria. You are an American dream success story. Because I'm an immigrant. I was not born in the United States. Yes and no. Yeah, sure, I'm a success story because I worked hard, but there are lots of other people who worked really, really hard who didn't succeed because they didn't get lucky. They didn't have the lucky breaks. They didn't have those lucky moments. So I think that on the whole, if I had to pick one extreme or the other, I'd say that Americans need to open their eyes to just how important luck is in our lives. They've gone way too far in the other direction.
Yeah. And I also feel, and there's something you sort of touch upon in terms of just the education systems in the US, in India, everywhere, where certain things I think are just not taught enough. Probability theories and, the role of chance, how you calculate this. I think these are so much more important in terms of decisions we take in life than things like calculus, which I really don't know how much calculus has helped me in my life. So I guess at one point I was fairly good at it.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think that statistical education is really undervalued, and I think we should be teaching probabilities. I think we should be teaching that kind of thinking very early on. I mean, I'm a big proponent of teaching poker early on as well. I mean, I think you should start at a young age because that's a great way of teaching children how to think about probabilities. Right? Kids can actually grasp probabilities if you present them correctly. And I think that poker, because it's a game, is a way that you can get a lot of these concepts to stick in a way that you can't get equations on a board to stick.
Yeah. Maria also, from your namesake, is asking, as a psychologist, can you generalize these learnings from poker to other games too? Or does poker stand alone? This is something you deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are other games, obviously, that have both skill and chance elements. I think poker does stand alone in the balance and in the elements that you have, kind of the probabilities and the human elements, and just how much of the information is known versus unknown. So there's a reason that von Neumann came to poker as kind of the pinnacle for this specific type of game. And so there are other games that are beautiful and powerful for other reasons. I mean, I think chess is a wonderful game and people should learn to play chess, but it's different. It doesn't teach you how to think probabilistically, right? It doesn't teach you those elements that come from incomplete information games. There are games like backgammon, which is a game that Eric at Seidel actually came from. And those are actually, the balance of skill and chance is also off there, so they're much easier. And in a way, they're almost solvable in a way that No Limit Hold'em is not. And Eric and I have actually talked about this, and this is one of the reasons that he stopped playing backgammon, because poker is much more complex. And other people will say, oh, well, what about bridge? And I'll say, well, bridge is a very interesting game, but it's a multiplayer game. You're playing with a partner. And so that's a hugely different element from life decision making, where you make decisions on your own for yourself. And so I think that there are great arguments for the beauty and the strength of other games, but I do think that poker is unique in the respects of being a game of incomplete information, where you have to balance the math with the psychology, and you have to learn how to think in the moment and manage your emotions in the moment. So I think it's a much more holistic game that teaches you much more about life in a broader sense than other games can.
Yes. There was, in fact, a question about bridge, but you've already answered it, so I'll go on to the next one. Card games have never been encouraged among the young. Today, they're being made academic. So what is more important, making these games academic or making them socially acceptable?
Both. I mean, I think that those things go hand in hand. I mean, I think that to me, it's really, it saddens me that, you know, if I were to learn to play chess, everyone would say, "Bravo, Maria, what a wonderful thing. You know, what a great thing you're doing. What a good game for a smart girl." When I say I'm going to play poker, they're like, "Oh my God, you're gambling. This is terrible." And so I do think that we need to break through that barrier, and that was one of the things I tried to do in my book. And I try to make it very clear that poker is not gambling, and I don't see myself as a gambler. I see myself as a poker player. It's very different from any other game in a casino because you can win with the worst hand and lose with the best hand. And so you just see how important skill is. And in any other game, you know, you actually have to have the best hand to win. And so that's a huge difference. And I also, there's a reason I quote Immanuel Kant in my book, and the importance of betting and of money, that actually the wagering element is crucial and helps you think better, helps you calibrate your opinions better, calibrate your certainties better. I won't go into it right now. You can read Kant or you can read my book, but I do try my best to make it more socially acceptable because I do think that that's a really, really important battle to fight. And I think that it does go hand in hand with teaching it in schools, because if you teach people poker from a young age, then you teach it to them correctly. You teach them how to think through it. They don't sit down and say, "Oh, this looks fun. Let's gamble. I'm just here to gamble," because they actually understand the game. They understand that it's not about that. They will have come to it from a more, as you say, academic perspective. And I think that's very powerful. I actually think that that will make addiction much less likely, because it's not about the outcome. It's not about winning. It's about the decision process. It's about the skill. It's about thinking through it correctly. And I think that that's such an important distinction. And if you teach people to make it from the time they're children, then I think it will just clarify their thinking going forward in a very profound way. And that will perhaps go a long way towards making it more socially acceptable, like chess.
So I'll take one last question from the audience, and then I have one concluding question as well for you. So for someone, this is from someone who doesn't play the game at all, but would like to learn. So what would you say are the first 3 things they should start with, apart from the rules, of course?
Well, I actually really, even though this is very old school, I did love Dan Harrington's books. I think if you want something basic to read, they're great. The first 2 of the trilogy are the ones that are more relevant. And so I would do that. I would start actually playing for very, very small stakes online, because I think that you can get a lot of experience that way. And I would give you the advice that both Eric and Dan Harrington gave me, which is you can't play for fake money, because people don't play seriously, and you're going to learn bad habits. So just tiny, tiny stakes. You know, I started off playing for 1 cent and 2 cents, you know, just pennies, literally, because I didn't know what I was doing, but it helped me gain experience. And I would also say that these days there's so much amazing material online. There's so many sites that can help you and that can teach you to be a better player. My favorite training site is Run It Once, which is Phil Galfon's site. And I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I just love them, and think that that's actually the best training material available. But there are countless others. So I would encourage you to just do some work and actually start watching good players and watching strategy and trying to put it all together. And all of these things have to be active, right? You can't just passively consume the content. You have to work hard. So imagine that you're in school and you're going to get tested on it. So take notes, ask questions, figure out what you don't understand, figure out what you would have gotten wrong on a test, and study that and learn from it. So I think that those are all important things, and I could go on and on. There are lots of things to do, but I think that that's a good start.
Yeah, three very concise things they can start with. You spoke about really betting means to play for money means having skin in the game, in a sense. Skin in the game is some term one associates with Nassim Taleb quite a bit, and you end with the ludic fallacy that he speaks of. So the trajectory, in a way, is of poker teaching you things in life, but at the end, how life is not really a game at all and should not be thought of as that. But yeah, and so you actually end with quite a potentially very dangerous situation health-wise. So can you talk a little bit about that and also how you're doing now?
Yeah. Sure. I don't want to get into the ending because that is a bit of a spoiler, but no, it's all good. It's all good. But I do. So Taleb would, as I write, kind of distrust the entire premise of the book because he says you can't use games as metaphors for life because life is way more complex. And I say, yes, exactly. Life is way more complex than a game. And that's why games like poker are so important because they're cleaner, they're safer, they're a circumscribed environment where you can learn, where you actually have more signal and less noise, where you can learn to think probabilistically, where you can learn to calibrate risk, where you can learn to make these sorts of decisions, and then you can take them out of this bubble and into the messiness of life that is never going to be controllable. And so I think that it's a beautiful teaching tool and very necessary for helping us navigate a world that's infinitely more complex and infinitely more dangerous. And I will say, as you mentioned, the book ends on a health scare, and I'm happy to say that nothing like that has happened since then. But who knows? I think it's one of these things that makes you realize that you can learn only so much, and life is still going to happen, and that's okay. One of the things poker teaches you is to be comfortable with uncertainty, to be comfortable with not knowing, to be comfortable not knowing what the outcome is going to be as long as you've made the right decision. And so that's, I think, the most that we can hope for.
Yes. So, Maria, thanks so much for your eloquence in this talk, for the lovely book that you've written, which I recommend very heartily, of course, to poker players, all of whom will learn something from it, find something of themselves in it, but also to people who do not know the game, because it's very difficult to write about poker in a way that might be interesting to the layperson, but I think that you've managed that very well. So congratulations, and I now hand it over to Gillian for the vote of thanks at the end of the session. But thanks again. Thanks to all the listeners and the people who took time to ask questions.
And thank you to you for the wonderful interview. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
My God, what an incredibly stimulating conversation this has been. Thank you so much, Girish and Maria. I mean, I've always been terrified of poker. Whenever my friends play, I run a mile away. But this conversation has truly inspired me to attempt to try and learn the game. So thank you so much, Girish and Maria, for being with us today. Thank you very much. A big thank you to all our sponsors, a wonderful audience that we've had today, all the questions that you guys have sent in. Thank you to our session sponsor, Kotak. That's all for Day 2 of Tata Literature Live 2020. See you all tomorrow for some more engaging conversations, workshops, and performances. Take care.